Joined in studio now by international affairs analyst Dan Perry, who's also the former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press, as well as our I24 News senior Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us on the rundown this evening. How exactly do we know what's really happening inside Gaza? Foreign journalists, they're not allowed in unless they're embedded with the IDF, leaving much of the world to rely on local Gazan reporters. But under Hamas rule, that often means reports are filtered through Hamas propaganda. Now, a major German newspaper is exposing what it calls a coordinated effort by Hamas to stage scenes of suffering, manipulating global opinion through this powerful imagery. Now, according to the investigation, some viral photos of Gazans holding empty pots or begging for food, they were actually staged, with photographers directing people where and how to pose. Now, this is not to say that the suffering in Gaza is not real. But the images that we see, they don't always reflect the reality. And yet many news outlets, they publish them without context, treating propaganda as fact. I want to come back here in studio now to Dan Perry. So much of the imagery, it seems, is being staged or manipulated inside Gaza. But how can newsrooms responsibly separate this fact from fiction, especially when independent journalists are not allowed inside Gaza? What more can actually be done?
Well, you answered your own question. If there's no journalists inside Gaza who aren't Palestinians who are reasonably afraid of Hamas, and who knows, might be faking photos or staging whatever circumstances, there's not much you can do. You can apply your judgment. You can make sure that the local Palestinians that you hire have the highest ethical values as a journalist, and so all the obvious things. But, you know, I was the editor of Associated Press in the Middle East. That includes Gaza and many other police states. Can I honestly swear to you that there was no case of any photo being staged? It would be a lie. Of course you can't. But we did make every conceivable effort to avoid that happening, and that more or less begins and sometimes ends with the quality of the local people that you work for. I can attest that the local people that we had working in print and photos and TV in Gaza were the best that there can be. And by and large, I consider them to be very heroic, specifically and precisely because in working for a foreign outfit where many of their bosses were Jews and Israelis, they were exposed to a lot of anger of their fellow Gazans. Is it still the case now, when the place is a ruin and the hatred for Israel is maximal? I'm almost happy I'm no longer in that situation, because it really, really is very difficult. On the other hand, if Israel were to let in, foreign correspondents, who knows what would happen to them, because the place is extremely dangerous. So Israel's not wrong in saying that if we did that and someone were killed, we'd be blamed also. Maybe they should end the war. Basically, I mean, this is such a messy situation that the stronger party is going to get all kinds of blame. But to your question about journalism, there's a point where you just have to realize that you live in the real world. What about, as we were talking before, in the United States, reporters who cover the mafia, the waste disposal industry. Can their editors be sure that they're not afraid of the subjects of their coverage? Can we absolutely be sure that there isn't implied censorship when you're covering the mafia or criminals in general? Of course not. And reporters in Gaza are covering the mafia. And there's this false idea being vehiculated that there is Hamas censorship. There basically is not. What there is you're dealing with the mafia, and they're killers. And does that never factor into the decisions to maybe cover or not cover something? The viewer can judge for his or herself.
Well, Ariel, you've been, along with the IDF, in one of these embeds into the Gaza Strip. The IDF also come under fire for 22 months, not allowing independent journalists inside, only with these embeds. But what is the IDF's rationale here for protecting journalists, but also protecting freedom of speech?
Right. So ultimately, and you and Dan both touched on it, the core reason is to protect the journalists. The IDF does not want to put foreign journalists in a situation where they could either be kidnapped by Hamas, threatened by Hamas, or caught in the crosshairs, in the crossfire between IDF troops and Hamas operatives. Now, I respectfully disagree with Dan saying that there is no censorship inside the Gaza Strip.
Formal? Formal?
Their testimonies of AP whistleblowers, Maddie Friedman, saying
yeah. A lot of that is nonsense.
All right.
Look, as I say, it's implied. It's thuggery.
So he voices a scenario where there was a Gazan reporter who was contacted by Hamas after he reported a story, and they basically had to remove the story, and from that moment on could not show images of Hamas militants. You won't see dead Hamas bodies taken on AP websites or any other large
Well, he's
media.
embellished the story since then. His story originally was that in the 2008-9 war, when I wasn't here, by the way, I was in London, there was such a picture, and then the reporter called back and said, look, please take that picture off. And the implication was that the photographer was threatened. I don't know if that's true or not, but the idea that we can never show dead militants is false, because
we do often see many of these mainstream medias, including the Associated Press, filter their coverage of what's happening in Gaza, and often it does end up putting more of a pro-Hamas light on the situation.
This needs to be said. For the duration that I was there, which is 2011 to 2018, I can assure you that we showed dead militants. I can also assure you that we showed rockets being fired from civilian areas. All these claims are basically lies. But is it not true that if we showed it all the time, eventually Hamas might have got upset and maybe complained, and someone might have become scared? I can't promise you that. But within the bounds of what is reasonable when you're covering the mafia, we showed all these things. So these claims that they could never going to show a dead militant are patently false, and other claims, by the way, are even more ridiculously false, made from that particular quarter.
All right. So putting this whistleblower aside, there are numerous other photojournalists who have worked inside the Gaza Strip who say that there is the constant fear by Hamas, whether it's active censorship or tacit censorship. Ultimately, everything has to go through them in one way or another. If not in their approval, they will follow up afterwards. And at the end of the day, Israel does not want to put itself in a situation where it is responsible for the safety of these foreign journalists when they're not. This isn't your usual combat zone. This is an area that is controlled by a genocidal terrorist organization that has, in the past, kidnapped journalists, has tortured journalists, and Israel does not want, and in my opinion, shouldn't have this on its own responsibility.
Two things I want to say. One, the Gaza situation is a little bit of a singularity, but at the end of the day, as regards this particular issue, there are many other countries that the world's media tries to cover where the coverage is not free. For example, North Korea, AP opened up a bureau there. I mean, it's not free. There are various types of tacit and not tacit restrictions and limitations on what you can do. We also had a bureau in Iran. Many international media have bureaus in Cuba and elsewhere, and the reality is that none of these places are free. Should the media always append to every story? By the way, you should know the environment there is not free. I couldn't tell you one other very important thing. In the situation where Israel prevents foreigners from going in and has a legitimate beef against the situation psychologically even of the locals, Israel should be trying very, very hard to explain itself, what it's doing, what happened, what the purpose was. And this it hasn't been doing categorically. It's projecting indifference to the ruination of its image because of all this destruction in Gaza is met with outrage in the West and silence in Israel.
A very interesting discussion when it comes to the importance of journalism right now. Gentlemen, thank you very much.